Beginning as a young artist and continuing to today, there have been surprising constancies in work that endured changes in material, scale, and subject matter. I continue to use abstraction to speak about human experiences, to be drawn to making work walking the line between fragility and strength, and to use materials that incorporate light. I love collaboration and come back to working with others. I continue to push the materials I use in unexpected ways. I also continue to think with my hands, and tactility remains an important aspect in all I do. I did my undergraduate work in ceramics, working in porcelain because I loved its translucency, the color celadon, and the ability to pigment the clay itself. Color being inherent to my materials rather than applied has also been a constancy for me. My roommate was a medical illustration student. We had a skeleton hanging in our living room, and that was a clear influence on the dinnerware set and sculptures I made for my senior project. After college, I spent a year at various residency programs around the country. Time spent at McDowell, an interdisciplinary residency in Peterborough, New Hampshire in 1981, had an enormous impact on my understanding of what it meant to be an artist and encouraged me to pursue an MFA in sculpture at Columbia University. Moving back to New York City, I was interested in contemporary dance and studied some choreography. I was making large-scale ceramic sculptures focused on the body, relationships between abstracted figures, and movement. They were extremely fragile and often ended up in piles of shards on the ground. I needed new materials. Several years later, I was working in everything but clay, making large-scale work for indoors and public spaces. My work continued to be focused on human relationships through abstract organic form. In 1993, I had a workspace residency at Dudinay Paper Mill in New York City, pairing artists unfamiliar with handmade paper with a master paper maker. I collaborated with Paul Wong, using cotton and abaca sheets over armatures I had made in steel, wood, and found objects. I loved handmade paper and felt at home with the material. I loved its capacity to be skin-like as a slab of porcelain or chunky like clay slip. I loved the translucency of abaca and how naturally I was able to combine it with other materials. I was excited to continue my initial exploration. I was also very interested in gardens. My mother and grandmother had beautiful gardens, and I had my first one at the time. I was interested in the wildness of how plants grow unattended and the way we manicure them. This made me very interested in botanical gardens. With the support and collaboration of Mina Takahashi, then director of Dudinay, we approached several botanical gardens in New York City, looking for one who might be interested in an installation in their greenhouses. I used vines pruned from the gardens to create the armature for a large suspended form inspired by the plants in the pond. In the propagation room, where plants were germinating, an unmanicured space normally closed to the public was opened during this project. I used broken garden implements, rakes, and shovels as armatures for sculptures, which I strung throughout the space by garden hoses. Over time, vines grew around these hoses and they began enveloping the sculptures. Abaca is incredibly strong. These pieces were watered and rained on for 6 months and didn't fall apart. I started working with glass at about the same time I started working with handmade paper. My grandmother died, and I'd been thinking about the things that women generally inherit and what the value of an object might mean when the person you loved who owned it was gone. In my early works combining paper and glass, I was thinking about women's bodies and what it felt like to be in my body. Handmade paper and glass continued to be my primary materials 30 years later. Thinking about what it felt like to be in a body led me to think about where I felt safe to house or contain my body. I began a series of human-sized pieces on this theme. Hammock is made of woven belts, as if what held your body in one way could hold it in another. Cradle was made from an abandoned baby stroller with sneakers and shoelaces. The sneakers felt like open mouths to me. Itinerant Couple was a tribute to a couple who slept in a park in my Jersey City neighborhood, nestled together in various locations. These movable chaise loungers were made of re-engineered shopping carts, and the wheels worked. I was imagining being able to take your beds with you as you moved around. I moved to New Jersey in 1991 and became fascinated with its waterways, with the contradictions and environmental stresses they were facing, and how resilient they seemed to be despite everything. I was invited by Dori Papadimitriou, curator of the Noyes Museum in South Jersey, to make a site-specific installation inspired by the Mullica River. In my research, I had learned that there had been a papermaking industry in this part of New Jersey using seagrasses. You can see us collecting seagrasses to test for papermaking. We are wearing full-body life preservers since we had to do this by boat. The paper was too coarse to use on its own, but is flecked into the pigmented abaca I did use. The installation's composition echoes the path and palette of the river looking tea-colored from pine trees at the start, becoming bluer as it moved toward the ocean. This was the largest installation I made to date, the first of what would be many inspired by New Jersey rivers, and my first real use of color in handmade paper. I live in an urban and congested place surrounded by rivers. In the Hackensack River, there's an area called Mill Creek Marsh where in low tide you can see tree stumps emerging. You can see oil tanks, Walmart, and the Empire State Building. There are beautiful water birds and abandoned tires, along with everything else New Jersey has to offer. I first visited on a sunny winter day when the tree stumps appeared to be growing out of the ice. It was a complete mystery to me. Using handmade paper and glass, I began trying to emulate how the piece felt. I worked on this for several years with no particular destination in mind, just to feel the place in my studio. Curator Midori Yoshimoto invited me to show Hackensack Dreaming in the Visual Arts Building at New Jersey City University, quite close to the Jersey City end of the river. It would be a space where sculptures could hang from the ceiling and pulp could be poured on the floor, but it posed a new problem. An 8 by 10-foot wall at the end of the gallery where I had a window in my studio. I wanted the installation to feel immersive, and I didn't want to make any more sculptures. I joined together wet sheets of abaca on the floor to create a piece of paper the size of that wall, and worked back on the dry surface with paper pulp, more wet paper, rubber, and resin. I was trying to create the experience I had wandering around the marsh, and in the process discovered a new way of working that has compelled me ever since. The installation traveled to several venues, creating and allowing for different expansions of the piece, different floor surfaces, and columns to integrate into the work. And in the final venue at Urban Glass in Brooklyn, a window to the street and a 15-foot wall. Marsh Drawing Walkabout is the largest of these paper pieces I have done to date. Although I continue to make sculpture, I love leaving gravity behind and being able to work on the scale of my body while still maintaining an intimate sense of touch. I think of these as paper tapestries that tell abstract stories about place and personal experience. These are 2 New Jersey Turnpike drawings. I continue to be interested in water, both urban and in quieter places. I love lakes. Cherryscape is inspired by tree roots growing around boulders at the water's edge. Beneath the surface, inspired by patterns of life on the surface. My dad had post-polio syndrome, and as he aged, he fell more and more. I have done a series of sculptures and drawings thinking about walkers and wheelchairs and ways to protect him. My first solo exhibition devoted to large-scale paper tapestries happened toward the end of the pandemic. During the pandemic, I was thinking about being trapped inside by the birds I could hear outside, by the idea of flight as an escape, and also about death and angels in art. I began making suspended glass and paper wings to hang from the ceiling of my studio and keep me company during that time. They expanded to fill 2 floor-to-ceiling windows. The paper piece on the left incorporates all those ideas and images of some of the sculptures, along with small paper shapes. Sometimes I thought of those as particles of the virus, and at other times as tears. Song of These Times continues these ideas. The title comes from a quote by Brecht. In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. The glass sculptures felt to me like hands trying to connect, like mouths trying to speak, and like winged creatures landing on my walls. I continued to think about the interconnectedness of the fragility of our bodies and our physical environment, and how inextricably linked it all is. Over the years, I have generally made my paper by renting the studio at Dudonnet and bringing wet sheets of half-pressed paper back to my studio to work with. On occasion, I have made more complex elements of the pieces, working with master paper makers at Dudonnet. Where roots lie, and extending your reach, incorporate those elements into larger works. In 2022, I had a studio residency at Women's Studio Workshop in Rosendale, New York. I had a papermaking studio to myself for 5 weeks. We turned the vacuum table into a deco box, and I was able to make 40 by 60 sheets of paper and work on them over a number of days. I am working with intern and papermaker Thais Calverin, pouring a large sheet of flax with additional colors of pigmented abaca. We pull the plastic, add more pulp, disperse some of it with a hose, and then vacuum out the water.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah.
I later poured blue flax between foam core barriers and made a cotton blowout using twine as a stencil. A new direction is a paper tapestry that includes a hanging sculptural element made of wire dipped in pulp. There between is the place where the boundaries of land and water meet and dissolve into each other. I feel like it can also be talking about existence and its opposite, and for my studio practice, a merging of drawing and sculpture. Finally, I have done many collaborations over the years with scientists, poets, environmentalists, and other visual artists. I made the paper for this installation with Megan Woods during a Denbo Fellowship at Pyramid Atlantic Art Center. This is my first overtly narrative project. This excerpt is from a 30-minute mixed media installation and experimental opera about coral reefs and climate change.